Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio today. We are now in our third season and more excited than ever to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics as they relate to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here, issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers, lung and heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts on this month's theme of energy. And today we're going to focus on the clean energy imperative. What is it? Why is it important? Our nation has seen tremendous improvement in air quality over the last 50 years. And according to the National Lung Association, this is thanks to the Clean Air Act. However, they say, the unfortunate truth is that far too many Americans still live with air that's unhealthy to breathe, and the climate crisis is threatening to undo the progress. Our energy sources, that is, from the way that we heat, cool, and power our homes and businesses to how we travel, play an important role in air quality. And that's because they've been in the past and still are to some degree dependent on the burning of fossil fuels. Burning fossil fuels such as coal, natural gas, gasoline, and diesel emits toxic air pollution, and it releases greenhouse gases which drive climate change. And climate change not only endangers directly our health, but it also makes it more difficult to clean up some of the harmful ozone and other pollutants that are hanging out there in the air. Now, transitioning or moving away from dirty, polluting energy sources to clean energy is absolutely critical to protect the health of all Americans now and way into the future generations. It's time for we as individuals to make clean, non-combustion renewables the norm, and to call on cities, states, and our federal government to make clean, non-combustion renewables the norm as well. Transitioning or switching to clean energy is an essential step in ensuring healthy air for all Americans. Air pollution, made worse by climate change, is unhealthy for everyone to breathe, as we stated. Breathing polluted air contributes to an increase in numerous health problems, including asthma attacks, heart attacks, strokes, respiratory and cardiovascular harm, reproductive harm, lung cancer, and early death. Some groups are particularly at risk, including children, older Americans, communities of color, and those who have existing or pre-existing health issues. Now, the American Lung Association gives some statistics that just make your antenna go up, talking about electricity generation, and the greatest fossil fuel pollution generator is our electricity generation. And it says that 66% of the nation's sulfur dioxide, and this is the pollutant that causes acid rain, comes from electricity generation. And according to the American Lung Association, sulfur dioxide triggers asthma attacks in people and contributes to the formation of fine particles, also detrimental to respiratory health. The other eye-popping statistic they give is that 29% of nitrogen oxides, and these are particles that react with the sunlight to create the ground-level ozone and smog that we're always hearing about. Well, 29% of those come from electricity generation. And according to the American Lung Association, high levels of the nitrogen oxide increases susceptibility to respiratory infections, especially among children. And then they go on. They have many, many more, but we just can't go into all of them. But the point is, using non-combustion renewable energy sources reduces air pollution dramatically and limits climate change fueling greenhouse gas emissions. The environmental impacts of the generation of electricity, in addition to air pollution, include climate change, as we talked about, but also water pollution, threat to wildlife, and the risk of radiation from nuclear power plants. So this is a lot, and today we're going to look at some of the most common clean and renewable power technologies, as well as the environmental and the economic benefits of using renewable energy sources. But here today, to help us unpack this and to understand it more, are Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute and Luke Metzger with Environment Texas. And we are just very excited to have both of them here.
Great to be on. Thanks, Bernice.
Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute is Executive Director and Managing Director of Communications with the Rocky Mountain Institute. Dina, with more than 2 decades of environmental and energy communications expertise, has been in this business for over 15 years. And she's been tackling, along with Rocky Mountain, tackling the climate crisis by focusing on its main contributor, energy production and use, and which represents about 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Rocky Mountain Institute is comprised of some of the foremost experts in the world when it comes to clean energy solutions to address climate change. So again, welcome, Dina. We're so glad that you could join us today.
Really happy to be here and talk about these issues today.
Great. And Luke Metzger with Environment Texas is the Executive Director of Environment Texas, and Luke is a leading voice in the state for clean air, clean water, clean energy, and open space. Luke has led successful campaigns to win permanent protection for the Christmas Mountains of the Big Bend Park. He's led campaigns to compel Exxon, Shell, and Chevron Phillips to cut air pollution at 4 Texas refineries and chemical plants, as well as campaigns to boost funding for water conservation and state parks. Welcome, Luke. Did I get all of that right?
You got it all right. Thanks, Bernice.
Okay, good. We want to start with you, Luke. We want to start by helping our audience understand what clean energy is, what we mean when we say that. What is the difference in the terms clean energy, green energy, and renewable energy? Often they are bandied about, and I would venture to say that most ordinary people in our everyday lives, like our audiences, maybe don't understand the difference. So can you talk to us about that?
Sure. And of course, there's no official definition, and everybody wants to claim to be clean and green. But we know that often companies that use that term are just what we call greenwashing, or pretending to be clean and green to cover up a dirty product. So, for example, folks may have heard of the term clean coal, which is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as clean coal, right? So whether it's coal or gas, methane gas, or nuclear, those all have significant environmental problems associated with it, and we certainly would not count them as clean or green. So what we're counting as green and renewable are things like wind power, solar energy, electric vehicles, battery storage, energy efficiency. All of those things are very clean. Wind and solar, coming from an inexhaustible resource, and not, contributing any pollution to the air. And so, we're working towards a vision of getting the United States to 100% renewable energy, and so that would be, completely powered with wind, solar, battery storage, geothermal power, so using the power of the heat of the earth, and other kind of clean sources like that.
So can you list again, I know you stated them through your conversation, list the top renewable energy sources?
Sure, yeah. It'd be wind energy, both on land as well as off our coasts, offshore wind. There's solar power, and that's both, on our roofs, as well as, in larger kind of solar farms. There's also, potential for geothermal energy, so using the heat of the earth to produce electricity. And then there's the best form of energy is the, energy we don't use at all, so energy conservation and efficiency.
I hear biogas and biomass and low-impact hydroelectricity. Are those just lesser used, or are they renewable but not green or clean?
Yeah, great question. So hydropower, where basically, dams on a river and then using the power of the water in the river to turn turbines and create electricity is, in use in a great deal in places like Washington State, Maine, other states with, big, powerful rivers. And they don't produce carbon electricity. There can be, concerns to the environment, for example, impacting the run of salmon to the Pacific Ocean in the state of Washington, for example.
We'll be right back on the other side with Luke Metzger with Environment Texas and Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute. And we'll continue our conversation about the clean energy imperative. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Markets, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach looking at the whole body, none mercury. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lynndentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on energy, the clean energy imperative. And we are back with Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute and Luke Metzger with Environment Texas. And Luke was just explaining to us about hydroelectric power. And I think you're focusing in on the fact that it seems to be applicable maybe to certain areas. Is it limited to widespread use or what?
Yeah, exactly. So we're not seeing much new hydro being built in the United States. The hydro we have is mostly, there's some here. We have some in Texas, but less than probably 0.5% of our electricity here in Texas comes from hydropower. But other states like Washington, Maine, they do have high percentages of their electricity coming from hydro. And I think we're not seeing much more of it because, some of the environmental concerns around wildlife and not impeding the path of wildlife that use those rivers, right? That's what you do with dams and hydropower. But also just the enormous expense. Wind and solar are so much cheaper now and are growing rapidly. So that's where you're seeing most of the development in the renewable space today.
So the hydro is really limited to where it is now because there's not likely to be more built. So that will never rise in terms of its place.
I don't think so. Not in the United States, at least. I think there are some parts of the world that are still developing it, but I don't see much here in the U.S.
And even in the developing countries, I have to think now, as you said, wind and solar begin to be much, much, much more economical to use than even, that will overtake in developing countries. Those who haven't put out all that large capital outlay for hydroelectric, I don't see them just willingly doing that if they don't have to.
Yeah, and that's one of the great success stories of renewable energy in the last decade is that the price has plummeted. So the price of solar power in the last 10 years has dropped, over 80%. The price of wind power has dropped about 40%. The price of even things like, LED light bulbs, used to be like $40 to buy, the grocery store. Now they're just a couple bucks, right? So that's incredibly important to just make sure that we can bring these clean technologies to scale.
That's within the U.S., but across the world now, what do their percentages look like in terms of the most used clean energies that are being adopted there? And then is the U.S. behind the curve in our adoption or transition to clean energy?
Yeah, well, historically, we are the number one contributor of global warming pollution, to our atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And since in recent years, China has surpassed us as the annual biggest emitter. But, we are making a big transition, today. About 20 years ago, we got less than half of a percent of electricity from wind and solar power. Today, more than 10%. And globally, there are other countries, far ahead of us in some places. So Germany, a big leader, and Japan, South Korea, particularly on solar power. But we're catching up pretty quickly. China has also been making significant investments. So we have a lot of work to do, but we're holding our own.
Indeed. Dina, can you talk to us a little bit about the economic benefits to using renewables? What place does dollars and cents play there?
Listen, at RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, one of the things that we stress is there is huge economic benefits to this transition, and a lot of the solutions are not only feasible, but they're affordable. As Luke said, with solar and other renewable energy prices going down, it makes a lot of sense to use those in comparison to more expensive fossil fuels. And then there's also, I think, not just the dollars and cents, but the hidden environmental costs that really aren't priced into it. So you talked, at the opening of the program about health costs. We know that regardless of what you pay on your electricity bill, if you use fossil fuels, the health costs from exposure to that pollution are also a cost for the economy. And then lastly, our co-founder, Amory Lovins, was one of the first to talk about using less energy, right? You use less and you're efficient, and you spend less. And so I think there is a whole host of benefits, some in the dollar and cents area, and then some in the environmental benefits that reduce costs, maybe not immediately, but down the road for other things.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And what do you think are perhaps some of the biggest wins and accomplishments as it relates to transitioning or switching to clean energy that you all are seeing? I know as a research institute there at Rocky Mountain Institute, you all look at those kinds of things. So what are you seeing there, Dina?
Well, we're seeing a couple of things, and I think that, you focused rightly so at the beginning of the show on electricity production, but we really look at it in a whole energy system approach. And what I mean by that is there is energy that goes into making the steel that makes skyscrapers. There's energy that goes into making the concrete and the asphalt for roads. And so we have a whole buildings division. And we have to say, as we've done this transition that Luke has laid out in electricity production, mobility and transportation has become a much higher and much greater share of our emissions. And so we're focusing a lot on that. And so in terms of wins, we've had a lot of successes in recent years and months on a couple of fronts. One is building codes that incorporate low carbon materials. So make sure that as you're going to build the buildings, they actually use materials that are energy efficient and reduce greenhouse gases. Also, we are really pushing now for phasing out gas stoves. And although that may seem like a very small thing, that is the same methane that comes out of the ground when you're producing oil and gas and has its own health effects, even when the gas stove is off. And so New York just recently is advocating for regulations that would ban new gas stoves in buildings and multi-use buildings. We've also been working a lot on vehicle miles traveled. So, as you know, in Washington, President Biden is pushing a lot of money for infrastructure. And when we hear of infrastructure, we think of new roads. And there has been historically a push to say that expanding roads will actually ease climate pollution. But a lot of the analysis and assessments that go into determining that really don't factor in the fact that when you expand highways, more cars go on them, and it actually exacerbates climate change. And so states like Colorado have changed their formula based on our research. And so we're seeing some real change. And recently we were working in the state of Nebraska, not what you would think of as a very energy progressive state, with a public utility who has now vowed to go green and to look for green and renewable sources of power. So these little wins, add up, and we work globally. So we just launched, for instance, in India, a place where there is a ton of two-wheelers and three-wheelers that deliver all sorts of things in urban areas, a campaign called Shunya, that is the Sanskrit word for zero, to electrify those two-wheelers and three-wheelers. So they're not only contributing to climate, but they're also cleaning up urban air pollution.
Indeed. And let me ask you this, Luke, what kinds of wins are you seeing out there, especially those that can and will be duplicated?
Well, I think one of the most exciting recently was the passage by Congress of the infrastructure law, and we saw huge investments that are coming for clean energy. So more than $5 billion for electric school buses and other low-emission buses to help both protect children's health as well as reduce climate pollution. I think about $7.5 billion for electric vehicle charging infrastructure to make sure that as more and more people are able to buy electric cars, that we've got the infrastructure in place for people to charge them. So those are real exciting. And of course, right now, the Congress is considering kind of a $500 billion, $500 billion, investment in clean energy tax incentives. So making it easier to install solar panels on your roof or to buy an electric vehicle. So that's the big thing that's happening, and we're hopeful for, in the coming months.
Where are you seeing hard and fast dates or goals by which certain aspects or elements of the clean energy transition should occur? For example, maybe in some other venues, I know over the last year or so, many of the car manufacturers have come forth with, we're only going to be manufacturing electric vehicles by this date. So a lot of that's happened. Are there any other pronouncements out there with regards to other aspects of transitioning to clean energy? It would be nice if all of the local, regional, area-wide electricity companies put their date up there. But Are there any other dates, be it private or public, that are out there that actually serve to put a stake in the ground for a goal for this? If you can talk to us really briefly, we have 1 minute, and then we'll go to break and we'll come back.
Yeah. Well, the big goal, of course, is getting to zero carbon, so basically zero global warming pollution. And 2050 is the date that most scientists say we need to achieve that in order to avoid the worst impacts of global warming. There's a lot of interim steps along the way. President Biden has set a goal to get to 100% renewable and clean energy by 2035 on the electricity sector, and also has strengthened efficiency standards for cars and trucks.
Okay, and we will go right back there and finish this conversation. Very important, very exciting, too, of the goals that we have right after the break. We'll be right back on the other side with Luke Metzger with Environment Texas and Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute. Thank you all. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on energy and focusing on the clean energy transition. What is it? Why is it needed? When is it coming? And actually, right before the break, Luke Metzger with Environment Texas, along with Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute, were helping us understand a lot of the aspects of this. And Luke was just telling us about some goals. And you mentioned, and one that I want to unpack a little bit more, because I see it over and over again, as 2050, the date for zero carbon. Break that down so that our listeners and me know what you mean by zero carbon. How do we know, feel, and smell that we're in zero carbon?
Yeah, great question. Well, it's a very big goal and isn't going to be easy to reach, but we know we reach it by cleaning up all the major sources of pollution. So generally about a third of our pollution's coming from the electricity sector, so the power plants that provide electricity to our homes. So getting to 100% renewable energy on electricity is a key way to get that. On the transportation sector, that means electrifying all the vehicles on the road, so the cars, electric bikes, trucks, getting more public transportation, so we get fewer cars on the road, making it easier for people to walk and bike in their own communities to, again, move us away from gas-guzzling cars and trucks. And then on the industrial side, we have to, as Dina was mentioning, find other ways to, decarbonize that. And so, we can use green electricity, renewable power, in some ways on that to reduce the carbon intensity of steel, for example. But we also likely need to develop new technologies, including hydrogen, in order to get to zero carbon on the industrial side. And then there's also other sectors, agriculture, for example. We need to make sure that we're helping farmers sequester carbon in the soil and other steps that where agriculture is responsible for climate pollution.
So in 30 years, we're supposed to be at zero carbon.
Yes, less than 30. Yeah, but what we need is basically a World War II style mobilization. We went from when we were attacked by Japan in 1941 to not really having the troops and the equipment and the tanks and the planes we needed to be able to fight both the Nazis and the Japanese, and we just had this entire economy-wide mobilization where everything went towards fighting the war, and we won, right? So we know we can do it. We put a man on the moon in 10 years.
And we just come through it somewhat with COVID. We know we can do it when we mobilize everything. But so what's the difference in those efforts and this one? I'm glad that you described it in that way.
And the good news, as I mentioned, is, the price of renewable energy is plummeted. So the technology is available. We know the public wants to do this. Most Americans of, whatever political party they are, most Americans accept that humans are causing climate change and want the government to do more to reduce global warming and, move us to clean energy. So the public is there. The technology is there. We've got the people in leadership in government right now that want to make the big investments and put the policies in place. We still face opposition, though, from the big polluters. The fossil fuel companies are lobbying and making campaign contributions to try and preserve their the financial investments and maintain the status quo. And so we need to, the public to rise up and demand that the politicians listen to the science, listen to the public demand, not listen to the big polluters.
You would say that's a major challenge, is polluters. Lobbying to keep pollution in place?
Well, we know that, for example, Exxon knew about climate change. Its own scientists were warning Exxon about climate change back in the 1970s. And rather than, alert the public and work to solve this problem, they led a misinformation campaign, where we're trying to confuse the public about the science and suggest there was some doubt about it. And so they set our country back, decades through their efforts to confuse the public and to lobby Congress not to do anything. And so we're at a significant disadvantage, but thankfully, we still have time. We still have a chance to solve this problem.
Indeed. Have they been able to pinpoint, say, the top 3 diseases or death causes from the pollution that's caused by the
so some of the biggest ones are cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, cancer, lung deficiency. One of the biggest sources of death is from what's called particulate matter or soot. So basically the power plants or the diesel truck, will put out these very tiny bits of pollution called soot, and they're so small they can bypass the lungs' defenses and seriously mess things up. And so that can cause serious problems. Researchers at Rice University in Houston did a study where they evaluated 911 calls, and they found that on big smog days and days with high levels of pollution, calls to 911 over heart attacks went up significantly. And that's consistent with the science that shows that, the soot and particulate pollution directly can cause heart attacks and other cardiovascular problems.
Is that soot as in the soot that comes from your fireplace as well?
Yeah. So, there fine particles of soot come from lots of different sources, and including burning a fire or backyard barbecue. Those are not the largest sources of pollution. The largest are these the big trucks and power plants, but that's included.
Yeah, but I want for us to get an understanding when you say soot, that's what you mean, so people see what you're saying.
Exactly.
It's just that in the fireplace, it's not that much and that long, and when you're in the backyard barbecue, and it's dissipating into the rest of and diluting into the rest of the air.
Yeah, although I should note that, in many parts of the world, like India, the cooking, and using fires to cook food is, in fact, a major source of air pollution in a lot of the developing world and a big contributor to death. So it's not an insignificant source of pollution, at least globally.
That undeveloped areas where you got like lots of people kind of sandwiched together, all with open fires cooking in a finite area.
Yeah, exactly. And when we're cooking here, as Dina mentioned, there is a lot of growing and emerging science showing that there are health risks with gas stoves as well, but they're certainly a lot less dirty than just burning charcoal right in your living room, right? And and that's what we're talking about in some of the a lot of in India and China and other places where they don't have access to cleaner forms of energy. They're burning things in their living room or in their kitchen and breathing that exhaust, and that's very, very dangerous.
Indeed. I want to talk to Dina a minute too about what they may have found, or what Rocky Mountain Institute may have looked at in terms of health costs associated or savings associated with going to clean energy.
Well, we haven't done work specifically that looks at, how many lives saved, et cetera. We looked mostly at emissions, and I think that Luke did a great job kind of explaining some of the costs. But I did want to add 2 things. One, as the climate changes and we get warmer in certain areas, there is the risk of heat exhaustion, of people who can't get into cooling areas and get relief. And also the increasing and ferocity of storms plays a huge role. And so we have to think of that as a toll as well as the climate change. And then one other thing I wanted to add, Bernice, is I think that at RMI, we take a more pragmatic view, which is we look at, one of the things coming out of COP this year in Scotland, which is the big international climate conference, is that, there are some people who are for sure stymieing climate action, some polluters, but there are also companies that are really stepping up, and it's going to take all of us. It's going to take government. It's going to take individual action. It's going to take private action to solve this in, as you said, we have 30 years. We're calling this at RMI really the decisive decade, because we have to really put the pedal to the metal now to solve this. But it's going to take all of us. And I think, Luke and other environmental NGOs do a great job at this, at making sure that the promises that are made by companies are true and are not greenwashing. But I think that as an observer who has been to quite a few COPs and, some of the challenges with politics in this country and elsewhere, that we're going to need private enterprise to step up.
Indeed. We're going to go to break now, but we'll be right back on the other side to continue this conversation, Dina, because I want to ask you about bringing in ordinary people in their everyday lives and how they can make more of an impact as well. We'll be right back on the other side of the break with Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute and Luke Metzger with Environment Texas. Thank you all. We will be right back. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body, none mercury. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on energy, looking at the clean energy imperative, what it is, why it's necessary, and when we need it to happen. And we are back with Luke Metzger with Environment Texas and Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute. And before the break, Dina was talking to us about Rocky Mountain and the things that they're looking at. This is what I'm wondering, Dina, what would you say, or have you all looked at what are some of the most hot button or responsive issues around clean energy as it relates to ordinary people in their everyday lives? What moves them about clean energy?
What I love about this question, and sorry to chuckle there a little bit, Bernice, but is that this is where it's the hardest. I think that we as a professional communicator on these, I really think the climate challenge is a communications challenge and getting people on board, right? And to understand that they have a role in this and how it's affecting their lives, because we know what's happening. We have that research. We have a lot of the solutions, even as Luke said. It's how do you get people to enact those solutions? And I can tell you, you poll anybody and they'll probably say, I'm an environmentalist. I'm for, a better environment, a clean environment for myself and future generations. But then when you press them about some of the things they have to do, like maybe be more conservative with their energy or maybe pay a little extra, they don't want to do it, right? And I think one of the advantages we have when it comes to climate change is that this seemed so far out and so remote for a lot of people. But now I think it's starting to resonate that these effects are happening and they're tied to a changing climate. And, you don't have to look at, the Oscar-nominated movie Don't Look Up, for instance, right, which is satirical about the climate crisis, but really, I think, really brought home for a lot of people that this is real and tangible now. It goes back really to the basics. I mean, use less energy. We all can do that, whether that is, as a child, my mom always said, turn out the lights. Go electric, right? Try to get off fossil fuels yourselves. Some people do that by putting solar panels on their houses, right? Some people do it by buying green energy off the grid and increasing the share of green energy on the grid. And as Luke mentioned, and I think it's really, really astute, is that depending on where you are, there are going to be different solutions, and people are in this at different places.
Thank you. Luke, let's hear from you, though, in terms of what you have seen as maybe the most hot button or responsive issues around clean energy as it relates to the audience of ordinary people.
Yeah, well, I think there are unfortunately a lot of misperceptions still out there about green energy. For example, a year ago, Texas went through the deep freeze where millions of people lost power, including my own family. And unfortunately, our governor, went on the Sean Hannity show on Fox News and falsely blamed, wind power.
Wind power, like that was so.
Right, and unfortunately, he had a big audience. A lot of people heard that and believed him. And as many people have attempted to debunk him, as the federal government did, demonstrating that actually it was natural gas plants that were the overwhelming part of the problem and the failures that we faced. I think there's still, attacks on renewable energy saying, oh, we just can't rely on this. But we do know that, in fact, that it's true that the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. I just learned there's a German word for that called Dunkelflauten, which I thought was kind of funny. But it is true that doesn't. But when you have a balanced, a mix of those different forms of energy, you can get to 100% renewable energy. So we do know that the wind blows most at night. We know the sun, of course, shines during the day. And so we also can take advantage of that. Those energy sources are available in different parts of the country at different times, right? So with better investment in transmission, we can import wind power from Kansas, to California, or solar power from, Georgia up to New Jersey. So there's ways that we can absolutely get to 100% clean energy. And researchers have actually found that would more than pay for itself, that we would, because the fuel for solar and wind is free, right? We don't have to pay Mother Earth for the wind or the solar. Once we have the infrastructure in place, the wind turbine and the solar panel in place, the fuel
capture and send it, yeah,
free forever.
There used to be a perennial discussion about batteries and storage. Where are we with that along the transition?
We've made, incredible strides on battery storage in just the last several years. And for example, here in Texas, we're seeing a huge boom happening in batteries as well as solar and wind power, and that's great news because that'll help fill the gaps when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And so we're seeing both the large utility scale batteries, but also there's been a big growth in people buying their own batteries for their homes. There's a program in Vermont where the utility will pay people 90% of the cost of the battery in exchange for getting to tap into that electricity when the grid needs it. And so I think that's a pretty exciting kind of model that the rest of the country should look at to make sure that everyone has power in their own homes, because I think that's the energy that people are most excited about is, solar on your roof and your own battery. So you've got that independence. No matter what happens, you can keep your power on. And
is a battery a big, bulky, clunky thing?
Yeah, good question. I don't have a battery myself. I have solar panels on my roof. I don't have a battery. So I don't think they're that big, in my understanding, but I don't actually know how large they are. But no, I think, for a home battery, it's you put it in the garage and it won't take up too much space.
That is promising, because that was one of my questions, was going to be what are some of the most promising technologies, programs, and initiatives. I want to go back for a minute. And again, I'm looking at 2050 is our goal date. It's not a drop-dead date, but it's a goal date for us to be at substantial or all the way transition to clean energy. What happens if we're only 50% of the way at that time?
Yeah, well, that's the good and bad news of global warming, right? That every amount of carbon we put in the atmosphere and every tenth of a degree that we avoid heating up has different impacts for the climate, right? So the goal, is to keep the planet from warming no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius than it has historically. And if we can do that, we can avoid some of the worst impacts of global warming. But every degree hotter means even worse things happening, right? So if we don't get to 1.5, but we keep it to 2, or we keep it to 2.5, that prevents a lot of misery and a lot of death, from happening on the planet. So it's not all or nothing. Everything we do helps. It can be real depressing reading the news about climate science and think like, oh, it's hopeless, right? It's not. Everything that we do can have an impact and help, save lives and help preserve wildlife and enrich ecosystems on the planet that are threatened. We need to act with urgency, but we still have some time.
And Dina, last thing for you, as we move to the clean energy transition, how do we communicate its economic benefits? Because I think a lot of that was attempted with the infrastructure bill, but for whatever reason, it didn't take and people didn't take hold to that. Because I think that's another mechanism by which really to get people more energized and excited and bought into this transition that must occur.
No, totally. So one thing I'm going to say to you is just a little bit of a slight correction, which is the transition's already underway.
Yeah.
Which is great news.
Yes.
We're not waiting for the transition to happen. It's happening. Listen, I think it goes down to the individual projects. Like, let me give you an example. That's a Texas-based example. We're working with the city of Houston behind the scenes to pick a landfill that has been really an eyesore in the community of Sunnyside in Houston into a solar farm. And that's going to build a clean energy production facility, have jobs in the local community that could help build that. So there is real economic potential from these projects, and they also have side benefits. So in a city, a solar farm could be on top of a parking facility. And there's a bunch of other side benefits that I think we have to do a better job at talking about, because for some people, we know this. And I tell my team at RMI this all the time, that we're all in on this transition, but we need to get others all in on this transition to make it happen. And that's necessarily, for some people, an environmental argument. It might be an economic argument.
Indeed. And I'm seeing a lot of indications that to get in on this and really get people to buy in, that may be where we need to go. Last word really was with Dina. We're so happy that you all could be with us. It's always not enough time. So thank the both of you all for making us much, much smarter. We have been with Luke Metzger with Environment Texas and Dina Cappiello with the Rocky Mountain Institute. And again, they've made us smarter, have a better understanding of what is so imperative about the clean energy transition that we are not in the middle of, but we're certainly underway with it. So thank you all very much. And thank you, audience, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your home, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is a result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. And each of those tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up one way or the other to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening, and join us again next week for more Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. Thank you.